Number 9. Alien hand syndrome. Everyone assumes that every movement of the human body originates from a conscious decision, that the limb moves because you chose to move it. A left arm reaches across a sleeping woman's chest. It wraps around her throat. She wakes up struggling, not against an intruder, against herself. In 1908, neurologist Kurt Goldstein documented a 57-year-old patient whose left arm had developed what the clinical notes describe as autonomous motor intention. The arm would unbutton clothing without being directed, hide objects the patient had just placed, and on one recorded occasion, attempt to strangle her while she slept. She was forced to use her right arm to physically fight her own left arm to survive the night. MRI data from the approximately 50 formally confirmed cases in medical literature reveals the same pattern. The motor cortex of the affected limb fires in isolated bursts, completely free from frontal lobe supervision. The conventional explanation points to lesions in the corpus callosum or frontal cortex, a disruption in the inhibitory flow between hemispheres. That part is documented. What the explanation fails to address is this: a disconnected neural network is planning, executing, and opposing the dominant hand in real time. It unbuttoned, it hid, it attacked. Researchers admit they cannot identify the origin of the coordinated, intelligent intention commanding the limb when consciousness has been excluded from the circuit. Think of it this way. Your phone continues typing a message after you put it down, choosing its own words, sending it, and the explanation is that the keyboard is broken. You are not the sole owner of the body you inhabit. You are a temporary tenant, forced to share the space with something that does not ask for permission. Number 8. The left hemisphere interpreter. We assume the voice of our own reasoning is an honest transcript of deliberate, logical decision, that when we explain why we did something, we actually know. In 1976, scientists Michael Gazzaniga and Joseph Ledoux were working with a patient known as PS, a man whose brain had been surgically divided by severing the corpus callosum. The two hemispheres no longer communicated. They projected a snowy landscape to his right hemisphere, a chicken claw to his left. Then they asked him to point to a card that matched what he saw. His left hand pointed to a snow shovel. His verbal center, located in the left hemisphere, which had only seen the chicken claw, immediately explained that the shovel was needed to clean out a chicken coop. The brain constructed a logical lie in real time to explain an action whose true cause it had no access to. Not a slow rationalization, an instant one, delivered without hesitation, believed completely. Neuroscientists call this mechanism the interpreter module. Localized in the left hemisphere, its function is to unify fragmented experience into a continuous narrative. That part is measurable. What is not measurable is why this system operates without any error-checking mechanism whatsoever. It accepts impossible explanations as literal truth. It defends them. Imagine your navigation system recalculating after you have already arrived somewhere, then insisting it always knew the route. Every explanation you have ever given for your own behavior passed through a system that was already lying when it generated the answer. The scientists built the machine that does this. They have not been able to turn off the part that invents the story. Your identity is a biological fiction generated by a brain that prefers lying to admitting that it lost control. Number 7. Blindside. The standard understanding is straightforward. To perceive the visual world in detail, you must be consciously seeing it. In 1974, neuroscientist Lawrence Weisskranz evaluated a patient designated DB following surgical removal of part of his primary visual cortex. DB was clinically blind in a defined region of his visual field. He reported complete darkness. He insisted consistently that he could see nothing. Then the tests began. Weisskranz asked DB to point to where a light was. DB said he was just guessing. He pointed with near-perfect precision. Another patient, SL, achieved 80% accuracy distinguishing colors in a region of his visual field where he reported seeing nothing, and over 90% accuracy on contrast detection. When told his scores, He could not explain them. He did not believe them. The term blind sight was coined to name this: a complete dissociation between the biological processing of visual information and the conscious experience of seeing. Neurobiologists propose that visual information reroutes through evolutionarily older pathways, the superior colliculus, bypassing the damaged cortex and connecting directly to motor regions. That pathway exists. The proposal is anatomically plausible. What it fails to explain is how abstract characteristics like color and contrast are being processed and used correctly without activating a single trace of awareness. It is like discovering that your car drove itself to the correct destination while you sat in the back seat with your eyes closed. And the car insists it was you driving. There are silent eyes inside the skull that observe the environment in real time. They navigate, they distinguish, they record. They simply refuse to share what they see with the part of you that thinks it is watching. Number 6. Capgras delusion. The assumption: when you see the face of someone you love, the brain produces a recognition response that includes, automatically and simultaneously, the emotional signature of familiarity. The two cannot be separated. In 1923, psychiatrist Joseph Capgras documented the case of Madame M. She was lucid. Her vision was intact. She could describe her husband's face with complete accuracy, the exact shape of his features, the color of his eyes, and she was absolutely certain he was not her husband. He was an identical impersonator, a double, someone pretending to be him, for reasons she could not fully determine. Skin conductance studies on Capgras patients revealed a mechanism with clinical precision. When these patients view familiar faces, they generate zero measurable autonomic response, the signal that normally confirms emotional familiarity. A small, involuntary rise in skin conductance simply does not arrive. The face is recognized. The feeling of recognition is absent, and in that gap, the brain does not report a malfunction. It builds a conspiracy. Prevalence of this delusion reaches 4% in individuals diagnosed with schizophreniform psychosis. The dominant hypothesis: a physical disconnection between the fusiform gyrus, which maps facial features, and the amygdala, which generates emotional response. The disconnection is measurable. What psychiatry has not explained is why the brain, confronted with the absence of an emotion, constructs an elaborate alternative reality, rather than simply noting that the emotional system has failed to respond. The brain could say, "I recognize the face, but feel nothing." Instead, it says, "This is not him. Something replaced him." A few millimeters of severed connection. That is the distance between recognizing the person who has known you longest and becoming convinced they are an imposter wearing that person's face. Number 5. Cotard delusion. The deepest survival instinct in the human biological system is the continuous, uninterrupted awareness of being alive. It does not require thought. It does not require confirmation. It simply persists. In 1880, French neurologist Jules Cotard documented Mademoiselle X. She was ambulatory. She spoke in complete sentences. She reasoned, and she was completely certain she had no brain, no chest, no stomach. She believed she was immortal because she was already dead. Her organs had vanished, and she could not die a natural death because there was no longer a body capable of dying. She refused to eat. She starved to death. Modern clinical studies document that patients in acute Cotard states frequently report smelling their own flesh decomposing. The olfactory hallucination is not a metaphor. They describe it as a persistent physical smell. Researchers associate the syndrome with severe depression combined with extreme depersonalization, combined with dysfunction in the prefrontal cortex and fusiform gyrus. That is the current model. What the model fails to account for is the central paradox. A functioning brain, physically active, generating language, constructing arguments, has managed to systematically disable every biological alarm that should signal ongoing existence, hunger, thirst, the body's continuous reporting of itself as present. Every signal that the organism is alive reaches the brain, and the brain dismisses each one. The human brain is capable of convincing itself that it is a forgotten corpse, drifting through the void of a world that has already ended. The patient does not feel that this is wrong. The patient feels that finally, the truth has been acknowledged. Number 4, Anton Babinski syndrome. Total blindness is assumed to be immediately, overwhelmingly apparent to the person experiencing it. The darkness arrives. The person knows. Described by neurologist Gabriel Anton in 1899, this condition has produced only 28 published cases in global medical literature. 28. In patients with severe bilateral lesions to the occipital lobe, the region that processes visual input, the brain is receiving no visual information whatsoever. The sensory pathway is severed. These patients insist they can see, not vaguely, not uncertainly. They describe the room around them in vivid detail. They report colors, furniture, the appearance of the people speaking to them. When they walk into walls, they apologize for being clumsy. When they fail to pass through a doorway, they offer explanations for the obstacle. The hallucinations generated by their own brains are detailed enough and trusted enough that physical collision with solid objects does not disrupt the belief. The theoretical mechanism. The language centers and parietal association areas become isolated from the damaged visual cortex, making it impossible for the mind to register the absence of sensory input. The architecture of the failure is plausible. What scientists cannot explain is how the mind constructs a real-time visual simulation, convincing enough to override the experience of repeatedly falling down. It is like a machine that has run out of fuel, but whose dashboard shows a full tank, a clear road, and steady speed. The brain can fill the void with a lie so complete that the person walks toward the edge of the stairs, seeing light, seeing space, seeing a path forward until the fall begins. Number 3, terminal lucidity. The established model of neuroscience is unambiguous on this. Complex cognition, memory retrieval, personality expression, these depend on structurally intact neural tissue. If the hardware is destroyed, the function is gone. Named in 2009 by researchers Michael Nahm and Bruce Grayson, terminal lucidity describes a pattern documented in patients in advanced neurological deterioration, Alzheimer's, severe dementia, brain tumors that have displaced functional tissue over years. These patients, many of whom had not recognized a family member or spoken a coherent sentence in months or years, suddenly recover. Not partially, they recover. They recall names. They reference specific memories. They recognize faces they had forgotten. They speak in complete, coherent, emotionally appropriate sentences. They are briefly, entirely themselves. Approximately 84% of patients who experience this sudden cognitive recovery die within 1 week. A survey of Canadian palliative care professionals found that 83% of them had personally witnessed at least one such event in a single year. In one documented historical case, Anna Katarina Emer, 26 years old, profoundly mentally disabled from birth, who had never spoken a single word in her entire life. She spent 30 minutes singing songs with clear, perfect articulation before dying. Physiological hypotheses speculate about massive neurotransmitter release or pressure changes in the cranium during the final hours. These are speculations. No imaging technology has captured the mechanism. What the medical community acknowledges and cannot explain in physical terms is this: a brain whose tissue has been severely atrophied, disintegrated, or consumed, a machine whose hardware is objectively destroyed, is suddenly orchestrating perfect cognitive and motor function. The hardware is gone. The performance happens anyway. The self that spoke in those final moments did not live in the cells that decomposed. It was waiting. For what and where, the neuroscientist cannot say. Number 2, choice blindness. The assumption underlying every decision you make is this: the choice reflects a genuine internal state. You chose it because something in you preferred it. The reasoning that follows the choice is honest access to that preference. In 2005, researcher Petter Johansson published a study in which participants were shown pairs of photographs of women and asked to choose which face they found more attractive, simple, immediate, personal, using sleight of hand, techniques borrowed directly from card magic. The researchers then handed participants the photograph they had not chosen and asked them to explain their selection. The majority did not notice the swap. More than that, they explained it. They described specific features of the face in the photograph they had rejected, features they found appealing, features that had influenced their decision in detailed, sincere, emotionally engaged language. They were not lying. They were not uncertain. They were describing a choice they had never made with complete conviction and generating reasons in real time that felt entirely their own. The acceptance and justification rate for manipulated choices, approximately 75%. Cognitive theories point to working memory limitations and short-term distraction. The neuroscience cannot explain how the mind reconstructs in fractions of a second an entirely new moral and aesthetic intention, complete with supporting detail, without triggering any internal signal that something has gone wrong. It is as if a verdict were delivered, and then, a moment later, the judge delivered a full account of the deliberation that had never occurred. The choices that structure a human life are not retrieved from within. They are constructed afterward. The architecture of personal preference is built in real time after the fact to explain whatever the hand already reached for. Number 1, unconscious anticipation. Everything depends on what comes next. The entire structure of personal identity, responsibility, agency, the feeling of authorship over your own life rests on a single assumption that the self decides and then the body acts. In 2008, neuroscientist John Dylan Haynes conducted an fMRI study at the Charité Universitätsmedizin Berlin. Participants were instructed to choose freely, at any moment they felt ready, to press a button with either their left or right hand. They were asked to note the position of a clock hand at the moment they felt the conscious intention to move. The computer's monitoring activity in the frontopolar cortex and the precuneus were able to predict with mathematical precision which button each participant would press, up to 10 seconds before the participant consciously decided. The choice had already been processed, already determined, already decided, physically in measurable neural activity before the participant experienced any sensation of intending anything. The researchers were careful in how they framed this. They noted that the 10-second window likely represents the time higher-order neural networks require to prepare a motor selection subcortically. That framing is accurate. It is also the description of a decision made without you. The scientific community acknowledges the causal gap. They acknowledge that consciousness arrives after the determination has been finalized. What they cannot close, what they admit they cannot close, is the question this opens. If the decision is complete before you experience making it, who decided? Not what decided. Who? Because if the answer is a neural network, then you are not making decisions. You are being informed of them. Consciousness is not the author of the book. It is the reader who turns the page and tells itself it knew how the sentence would end. If that bothers you, it should.